We have here Dr. Craig Allen from Rushford, Josh Kovner, reporter at Hartford Courant, who's covered this ordeal.
Thanks,
this is it was riveting to watch that story and see that many, about 100 overdoses. When's the last time, Doc, you had 100 overdoses and no one dying?
Well, I think it's great nobody died, but that is terrifying that so many people were using the same poisoned batch of drugs.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, K2, what is K2? Because it's a misnomer to call it synthetic marijuana, right? It's not really marijuana. So describe, what is K2?
Yeah, so it's not marijuana. The overlap is that K2 is the name. It could be called K2. It could be called Scooby Snacks. It could be called White Buffalo. Mm-hmm. It's just a name that's given to any of these compounds where some type of organic matter, leafy matter, is sprayed with a research chemical that has euphoric effects when someone uses that chemical, whether it is smoked or whether it's vaped or whether it's used in a tea. The overlap with marijuana is in that these synthetic cannabinoids, so we talk about synthetic cannabinoids. K2 has...
What a cannabinoid? You're getting all doctoral on me now, Doc. What's a cannabinoid?
Okay, so any substance that impacts these receptors in a system that we have in our bodies called the endocannabinoid system. It's a system that modulates our physiology. When we're hungry, when we're cold, when we're happy, when we have pain, it's a very interesting system that was really discovered back in the early 90s by a guy named by this scientist from Israel, and it was in 1960s that he identified tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the psychoactive property in marijuana. But it wasn't until the 90s that the system that this external substance acts upon to make you feel good, to make you feel high, was identified. Turns out a lot of physiologic responses, a lot of physiologic properties within the endocannabinoid system, and we have endogenous transmitters that impact the system. But these outside transmitters, like marijuana and THC, is the cannabinoid marijuana.
It creates the high. That's what creates the high.
Yeah. So
okay.
there are 70 different cannabinoids in marijuana that can impact the endocannabinoid system, but the one that makes you high is THC, and the other one that's been most studied is called CBD, cannabidiol. And it's thought that cannabidiol probably has some of these medicinal properties, and doesn't have the psychoactive properties that make you high. So CBD isn't something you get addicted to, but THC is something you get addicted to. What these synthetic cannabinoids have is that same property as THC in activating the receptors in your brain that make you feel high, only these synthetic cannabinoids are much, much, much stronger. And they're pure agonists. They're purely activators at this receptor. There's nothing else in there to oppose their activity. And
hence the intense attraction. So Josh Kovner, on the ground, as a journalist, what are you hearing when you were down there in New Haven? What are they saying on the green about, one, the appeal of this drug, and how did they get to the point where New Haven became the focal center of this?
Well, New Haven had its day, and you only get a national problem if a bunch of local places exhibit the behavior. Then it rises to the level of a national issue, and New Haven's turn came around. Turns out that there's about 2,000 medical calls a year around the New Haven Green.
Right. This wasn't the first time they had something. This was a big one, but they've had other issues like this, but smaller, right?
Correct. And New Haven Green, to the chagrin of some people, has become a meeting place for transients. New Haven, like other central cities, has a lot of services. People come for the services. They stay. You had a couple of dealers. Police made 3 arrests. 2, they've identified, Parker and Melendez. The 3rd arrested federally, they haven't identified yet. Were distributing it either free or very cheaply. And a recovery coach was telling me on the scene, people hear about a batch that is producing overdose, and the doc was talking about, the
cannabinoids,
the illogical responses of an addict.
Right.
You hear about a batch that's producing overdose, they'll say, must be good.
Yeah, that's my question.
I want some. Yeah. And they say, I'll take less. Nobody takes less. And anyway, it's so strong with this Fubinaca sprayed on it, which was a research drug from Pfizer that they abandoned, put on a shelf, but it still got out there. It was produced in clandestine labs in China and comes back around here.
So the guys they caught, right? These
Yes.
guys who they caught trying to, and they weren't really selling it, they were just distributing it, right?
Selling
so we know,
cheap or distributing.
right, those
yes.
are the underlings. We know that we got to connect those guys to the people who are creating this stuff, right? So are they able to, will they be able to find out who those guys are attached to? Because you got to follow the chain. Those are the lower guys on the totem pole,
I think they'll make some
right?
headway. I think local, working with feds, I think there's the motivation to make some headway on this, because nobody wants to be international focus
Right.
with mass overdoses again.
Right.
And we also know if it happens in New Haven, it can happen anywhere,
That's right.
and not just urban areas, right? As the opiate crisis showed us, people tend to want to associate addiction to urban areas.
Yeah.
But we're seeing now with opiates, the suburbs, Glastonbury, the Simsburys, the Avons, those places all get it too, right?
Yeah, I think research chemicals can be purchased by anybody, and you can get them on the internet. Unfortunately, the attraction with these synthetic cannabinoids is that they give you a similar high to marijuana, but they are much, much less expensive.
Right.
And so you tend to see people with few resources, or people trying to avoid urine toxicology screening. So those are urine drug tests, because this doesn't show up in a urine drug.
Oh, really?
test. No, this won't show up.
Why not?
Because they're fancy research chemicals. You have to send away to a special lab to get the results back. So
that's problematic for the folks on your end, right?
It's problematic for on my end, and also, we want parents to make sure that their kids are not trying to avoid showing up positive and use this substance, because it's so incredibly dangerous. But there was an incident a few years ago. You might remember that there was a professional football player actually played for the New England Patriots, and it was during the playoffs, and he was using this substance and ended up psychotic. Standing in front of the police station naked. You remember that story,
Yeah, and they were calling that at the time. They were saying that was synthetic marijuana. Was that?
He's going to avoid the urine tox screen because of the NFL test.
Right, interesting. Okay, I do remember that. That's right. So another issue, I was reading that the Narcan, about 15 seconds, Narcan, the drug used to counteract addiction, your Narcan, it didn't work in this case. Why not?
It's for opioids. These aren't opioids. These are cannabinoids. There's no antagonist drug. There's no reversal drug for
Was that
cannabinoids.
Frustrating for folks on the scene? The rest figured out, hey, this is
they were using 10 doses, and the state. I was at the Alcohol Drug Policy Council yesterday, and Delphin Rittman-Cass, the commissioner, was saying they were ready to grab all of the Narcan they had in the state they were going to be distributing and start using it.
But it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to hold that thought, Doc, and Josh will come back more and talk about the crisis in Connecticut now with K2 and what's happening in New Haven and possibly beyond. We're going to talk now the governor or the president's special assistant or his czar, drug czar, came down to New Haven and gave talked about some solutions and didn't really offer it much more than platitudes. We'll talk more about that. You are watching the Stan Simpson Show. Don't go away.
Monday on Family First. It's back to school season, and that means buying or making lunch. We sit down with a nutrition expert to discuss what kids should be eating. Learn how you and your children can make healthier choices together. That's on Family First, Monday at 8:20.
Attention! If you have had a hernia surgery after 2009 and suffered from serious side effects such as infection, chronic pain, organ damage, mesh shrinkage, or mesh migration, you could be eligible for financial compensation. Call the law offices of Wright & Schulte right now at the number on your screen or visit meshjustice.com now. Ethicon, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, has recalled its PhysioMesh flexible composite mesh. Call the law offices of Wright & Schulte immediately at the number on your screen or visit meshjustice.com now.
Addiction is an epidemic in America. If you or someone you love is struggling with addiction, you need to call the R360 Network now.
I'm Ken Seeley, author, addiction recovery specialist, and former addict. R360 is a nationwide network of addiction recovery specialists that I personally selected and recommend.
The call is free, the consultation is free. If you have private insurance, your treatment could be covered with no out-of-pocket cost.
Call 800-634-8136.
And welcome back to the show. We're continuing our conversation with the Current's Josh Kovner and Dr. Craig Allen from Rushford. There's a scourge on the drug scene. It's called K2. It's ravaging New Haven. Are other Connecticut cities next? Again, Dr. Allen from Rushford, Josh Kovner, Hartford Courant, who covered this story and is continuing to investigate. So we talked about Narcan and how that's supposed to be sort of the fail-safe counter when you have a addiction issue or overdose.
Opioid overdose.
Yeah, and it didn't work here, so it created a crisis. All Narcan didn't work with K2. So what does work with K2?
Yeah, there's...
And why didn't people die?
Because we were lucky. We were very lucky. There have been other incidents. In fact, there was a warning out earlier this spring for bleeding problems. What had happened was this long-acting warfarin, which is a anticoagulating substance that's used for people who have clotting problems and so forth, was being mixed in with this synthetic cannabinoid because it has a very, very long activity, up to 3 months, and the high was being prolonged. So people were buying this substance that had this clotting, actually it's the substance that's used in rat poison.
Wow.
And they were bleeding out. And so here you have someone who has a change in their cognition, and they are bleeding out, and you don't know what's going on. What ended up happening in some of those cases was one way to treat this bleeding disorder is to use vitamin K.
Right.
And the amounts of vitamin K were being used up from the local pharmacies.
What does that do? That sort of...
It helps with the clotting factors, yeah. And
so
helps
when you say bleeding out, they're actually bleeding out?
You know, if you have bleeding problems, your mucosal membranes, your GI tract, and so forth, usually is bleeding through the GI tract. So we were lucky that people didn't die. And the other thing is, a lot of these users, my understanding is, some of them were older and not so young.
How old? How was the older? What age? What frame? What's the profile of the folks out in the green? Is there a working profile, Josh, of whether it's old, young, black, white, Latino? What's the working profile? Who's out there?
There was quite a age range, but I do think that this population was a somewhat transient. Some homeless was represented in there. Unemployed was represented. People with mental illness was represented. These are the types of communities that these dealers are preying on.
Right.
And the point you made last segment, Josh, you're saying that you can have a real pernicious drug like this, right, and tell people, hey, don't use this thing. It's really, really bad. And that, in essence, turns them on to try it even more because they hear it so bad, right? That's how the mentality works with some folks out there.
Well, you also have the addicted mentality. We were talking before. They come out of the hospital stabilized, go right back to the green in this case.
Right back to it.
And right back on the ground.
Amazing.
Right. Their addiction wasn't cured when they were stabilized physically and medically in the emergency
almost
room.
died, go to the emergency room, get well, and go right back out there and do it again, or try and do it again.
And the same medics and police and firefighters who treated them the first time are treating them the second and third time, and that's why the fire chief out there was talking about compassionate care fatigue, where how much of yourself can you give?
Right. So when you mention these drugs, like the synthetic drugs and people spraying different things, who's the person that experiments, that figures out, hey, this thing gets you high? You know, you mentioned there's different herbs and substances, and someone sprays something and they realize it's a good high. I mean, how do we get to that point where someone figures out, man, this could be a good high on a synthetic drug?
You know, Josh and I were talking earlier before we came on, and many of these substances were actually, they come from companies, pharmaceutical companies, that have been doing research on the endocannabinoid system. Many of these substances...
Basically the feel-good system of your body, right? From people out there, the layman out there, it's what makes you feel, it's what helps you to emote.
Part of that system, but the endocannabinoid system has to do also with pain and with
so the emotional,
physiologic processes, but emotional too. Emotional too. And these substances were created because it's very difficult to do research with marijuana. Marijuana is classified as, you know, by the DEA as a substance. It's very hard to get approvals to do that research. So these companies would make these chemicals that acted like some components of marijuana, and that's why they would attach to the cannabinoids. But they've been abandoned. They've been shelved.
But then they would see some of the offshoots of that and say, hey, this
isn't something we can use. This similar thing happened with some of these very, very strong opioids because there was was experimentation done. They said that we can't use this in humans anymore. It was shelved, but then there's open access to this information. These are patents that are available, and so scientists in other countries with nefarious things on their mind go in and make this substance and then sell it.
It happened with Viagra too, right? Change the subject here, but they were studying Viagra as a heart medication, and then found the side effects. Something else happened here, right? Yeah. So maybe a bad example, but it's sort of what happens when the research goes in there. Josh, the president's drug czar came to the ground on New Haven. Jim Carroll, who was the nominee drug czar. What did he have to say? Could he offer anything palpable for folks there who were in need?
Well, it was an opportunity for Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, to talk about the need for the Trump administration to try to get China on board with cracking down on their black market, as perhaps we have done in Colombia and other places.
Is that the primary port? China is the primary spot for this?
That's what they were saying.
Okay.
So that was discussed. Crack down on the high sources, or get it when it's coming across the border. It's hard to regulate the internet.
Right.
Then they were also talking about, look, who are these people?
Right.
And would providing housing, or if they had more stable lives, housing, education, job training, mental health treatment.
Which are all kind of long-term problems, right? Doesn't it solve the immediate problem, want to get high right now? Right. And you mentioned that they caught these two guys who were giving the drug out for free, right? So the key is, can they flip those guys to trace back where they're getting them from? Because those are the lower-end guys who aren't making any money, so how do you find?
You can't get any lower-end than those guys.
Right. So
one of them was pedaling away on his bicycle when the emergency responders started to come. And then in court, he
it'd be intriguing to find out where that all traces back, if you follow that chain. Right? The final thoughts, what can be done over the next few months? Because in New Haven, could very well happen in Hartford or Glastonbury next week. Is there any two steps we can take right now in 30 seconds?
One, you want to educate your kids. You want to educate people trying to use this substance to avoid urine toxicology identification, that this stuff can kill you. You don't know what it is. You're playing Russian roulette when you use this stuff. And I think that we need to have ongoing oversight and reporting, like the state of Connecticut is trying to do with the Department of Public Health, and like you do with infectious disease, where you can identify very quickly where these things are happening. They tend to occur in groupings, and they can be stopped at.
I would think college campuses would be a very dangerous spot too, potentially. Anyway, thank you for your time. Dr. Craig Allen, Josh Kovner, The Current, thank you both for your time. When we come back, folks will